Bonjour, Nindinawe Magani Dok. Hello, my relatives, and welcome. Kim Blazer, Nindinakaz, Anishinaabe Kwe Nindao, Gawa Babi Bonikag, Nindunjaba. I'm Kim Blazer. I'm Anishinaabe from the White Earth Nation of Northwestern Minnesota, and I'm founding director of Indigenous Nations Poets. I'm a little COVID voice tonight, but I'll try to hang in there for this opening. NAPO is a national Indigenous poetry community committed to mentoring emerging writers, nurturing the growth of Indigenous poetic practices, and raising the visibility of all Native writers, past, present, and future. We recognize the important role that poetry plays in sustaining tribal sovereign nations and Native languages. Please watch for our language back programming that'll be coming soon. Tonight, we're delighted to launch a series of flash classes, the first of which is part of a professionalization group focused, and this one is focused on publishing. We're honored to have Daniel Slager, publisher. Please find a full bio for Daniel in the chat. I want to offer two invitations. One is to share your contact information with us via email to Annie@indigenousnationspoets.org. If you want to hear about upcoming events or opportunities, you can also find these sorts of details on our webpage, and watch the chat for that link. And then if you would like to support the work we do, please see the chat for a link where you can make a contribution, and any donation, large or small, is welcome. And miigwech for being with us tonight, sharing your time. And there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions as we go along. So be ready to do that, and don't feel at all shy. I'm sure that the question you have to ask is the same one several other people want to ask. So again, welcome. And without further ado, allow me to introduce Daniel Slager. Daniel.
Thanks very much, Kim. Thanks to you all for joining the meeting. I'm really honored to be with you. When Kim explained to me the rapid growth of this organization, and I looked at it a little more closely, I'm really impressed. So kudos to you all. And I'm really pleased and honored to be with you. So I don't have as I said to Kim and Annie, I don't have a very formal presentation. I do have a few things to say about who we are at Milkweed Editions and who I am, and kind of how we fit into the publishing world and how best to approach us. And then I really thought, this time would likely be best spent with me responding to your questions. And so I hope to see them. I hope you'll have them. If not, it will be short. But I'm sure you will have questions. And I want to echo what Kim said. There's no such thing in this context as a bad question. Sometimes seemingly the most obvious things are actually quite interesting. So I'm open to any kinds of questions about Milkweed, about what we do and how we work, or about the publishing world, some of which I'll touch on in saying a few things about Milkweed. So I'm sure some of you know Milkweed Editions was founded in Minneapolis in 1980, which makes us now one of the independent literary presses that has stuck around for a while. We happen to have here in the Twin Cities 3 of the 4 largest indie literary presses in the US, in Milkweed, Grey Wolf Press, and Coffee House Press, which is wonderful. And I came to work here at Milkweed in 2005. So it will be 18 years for me here at Milkweed this fall. And before that, I worked in commercial book publishing in New York City. And I've also been an editor of a literary magazine, and I found my way into publishing as a translator. And so I've touched kind of a lot of the angles in publishing, and it's been useful to me to have experience in commercial book publishing, working here at Milkweed, but it's also really wonderful to be at an indie literary press. You may also know that our organization, we're a 501c3, we're a nonprofit organization. Being a nonprofit organization enables us to take chances on writers, largely emerging writers, that some of the big commercial publishing houses wouldn't be as likely to take a chance on, primarily for financial reasons. There's been so much consolidation in the commercial book publishing world, and as a result, there's so much pressure to generate profits. And if you're like me, and I suspect we share some interests, you probably also know that literary books, and especially poetry, is not the most lucrative undertaking. Publishing those books never has been that lucrative. And that's really why independent literary presses were invented in this country as nonprofit organizations. Here at Milkweed, we publish about 30 books a year now. The size of our list has roughly doubled over the last 10, 15 years. We publish, of those each year, somewhere 25, 26, 27 new books. And most of those are collections of poems. This year, I think it's 17 new collections of poems. And then we also publish literary fiction and narrative nonfiction. And most of the prose books we publish, fiction and nonfiction, come to us from agents. But unlike commercial book publishers, we do also look at manuscripts that come directly from writers. And very few of the poetry titles we publish come to us from agents. Again, just because it's not that lucrative, typically. We do see a growing number of submissions from agents, and some of the publishers we began publishing when they were unagented now have agents, but that's atypical and certainly not necessary. I'll say just a couple general things about the kinds of books we're looking for and the kinds of books we publish. I find it really hard to talk in broad general terms about what kind of poetry we're looking for, because our poetry list is really various by design. It's really a wide range of perspectives, voices, aesthetics, everything. And that's the way we like it. So even though this is not very helpful, I realize what I really say when people ask, what are you looking for in a poetry manuscript? It's above all originality. And we also maybe tend a little more toward lyric poetry at Milkweed, but there are plenty of exceptions to, and I recognize those terms are more often than not synonymous, lyric and poetry. But I guess I'm trying to say that musicality matters a little more here than maybe it does in some publishers of poetry. I mentioned that we publish 25 to 30 new books a year, about 30 books a year. The difference in that number is just that sometimes we publish books as hardcovers originally, and then in a following year as paperbacks. And we would also think of the paperback as a new edition, a new title. I mentioned that most of the fiction and nonfiction we publish comes to us from agents. Currently, I am acquiring and editing, with the help of some staff and some freelancers and a handful of editors at large, I am acquiring almost all the books we publish. I think all but one new book we're publishing this year, which is, arguably not sustainable, but it is a great privilege for me and endlessly interesting. I was just saying to someone in our organization earlier today, it's the kind of job where it's impossible to get bored, but it is possible to get tired. And some days I feel like that. We also, more than actually more than any other publisher I know, whether commercial, indie, university press, or anything, we invest a lot of time and resources in working with authors to develop manuscripts, sometimes over many years. I've accepted books based on the littlest basis has been a conversation. And I've also acquired books on the strength of very partial manuscripts, sometimes no more than 15 or 20 pages, and then worked in some cases over up to 8 or 10 years with writers to develop manuscripts. And we love doing that, both for several reasons. One, it's made it possible for us to find and publish some great books that we might not have seen by the time they got to a finished manuscript. Two, it's also enabled us to be more intentional about the kind of voices we are bringing into the cultural conversation, because if what you're doing is just picking the best of submitted manuscripts, from my experience, you have less of an opportunity to be intentional about identifying the kinds of voices we feel should be in the conversation and may not be in the conversation adequately. Our best book in I should say, not necessarily our best book, that's a dangerous thing for a publisher to say, but the book we've published in recent years that has had the broadest reach and the most impact is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And yeah, it's a book I'm really humbled to be associated with, and has frankly changed my life and changed our life here at Milkweed as an organization. And that book came to us in a form that is not very close to the book, you know. And we worked with Robin over 4 or 5 years to develop the manuscript into a book. And Robin was looking for that kind of editorial relationship. And that's one thing we offer. Another reason that book was such a good fit with our list is that we have developed an emphasis on our list, and we're well known for publishing narrative nonfiction, especially, this is true for fiction and poetry too, but especially narrative nonfiction, exploring our relationship as human beings with the more than human world, plants, animals, and so what some people still call nature writing or environmental literature. I prefer the longer description. I just don't really like those phrases, but you know what I mean. And Braiding Sweetgrass is a great example of it. And so that's something we do, is work very closely and intensely, often over years, with writers to develop manuscripts. That comes into play typically less with collections of poems, because we are so inundated with amazing manuscripts that we have more than enough really complete, polished, amazing manuscripts from which to choose. And so, but we do there too. And we definitely have worked with poets over years to develop what arrived as fragmentary manuscripts, or to work with poets we've published initially who are working on a project and are looking for an editorial relationship, to a collaborative relationship to help them develop the manuscript. We're often up for that. And that's not true for a lot of publishers. It's also made possible in large part because we are a nonprofit organization. And so we, in addition to revenue from sales, we have contributed income from grants and from individuals who value what we're doing in the culture. And so that's also part of what we do. We also have a bookstore, I should say, in addition to here at Open Book it's not a big store. It's a relatively small space, but that's been a great place for us as a publisher to engage with the local community. And we're in East Downtown in Minneapolis, and in a literary center called Open Book. I'm guessing some of you have been here. So that's also interesting that we're very committed to community engagement as a publisher. And that's one manifestation of that. We also work with our authors as we're publishing books to establish ways for them to enter into conversations and dialogues with all kinds of communities in all kinds of settings, from bookstores to libraries to community centers to book club meetings. We also work directly with a lot of academic institutions and professors trying to get our books adopted for courses, and even in some cases, and this has been especially true for Braiding Sweetgrass, as all campus reads selections. It's a great way to engage a community in a substantial conversation around a book. That gets us in a little bit to the promotional part of what we do. We work really intensely to promote every book we publish. The first thing our marketing team does is meet with a writer maybe 8 to 12 months in advance of a publication to discuss what the writer wants from the publication of their book. And this varies a lot, actually. We're happy to publish writers who have no social media platform and really don't want to leave their place that much, don't want to do public events, that's no problem for us. But we're also very happy to work with writers who want to be stars, and in every category we publish in, and really get out there and share their work broadly. But the first step is to get on the same page about what the writer wants from publication. And then we work closely with writers to really design individualized promotional strategies and to execute them around every book we publish. We do try to get major media attention for every book we publish, and we often succeed. But in some cases, more local promotion is more appropriate and more desirable for the author. And we really listen throughout the whole process. I like to think, I'm sure we don't live up to this value in every single thing we do all the time. But we are really committed to serving the writers we publish. That's really why we're here. And that goes from the way we dialogue with writers before submissions, to dialogue around submissions, to editorial work on manuscripts we've accepted for publication, and then to promotion and engagement and getting books out into the world. We also are committed, in contrast to a lot of publishers, we're committed to publishing books for the long haul. We don't give up on books after 2 months or 3 months. We keep books in print as long as the author wants the book to be in print. We don't take books out of print. We publish almost every book we publish simultaneously as printed and ebooks. Sometimes poets aren't interested in ebooks because the lineation doesn't always come through in some of those formats. But we do offer that. And in most cases, more often than not, we do publish books simultaneously as printed and ebooks. And then increasingly, we've been publishing audiobooks also, and which is especially exciting for collections of poems. And I think we all, I'm sure, love listening to poetry. And so often poems come more richly to life when we can hear them. especially read by the poet. So that kind of is a broad introduction to the way we work. I should say one more thing. We publish several books each year that result from contests, and so are associated with prizes. We publish the Max Richtfo Poetry Prize, which is awarded annually to a debut poet. And this year we had 1,200 submitted manuscripts, and the judge for that contest is Louise Gluck. And I understand she's made her choice, but I haven't seen the prize-winning manuscript yet. So long odds with 1,200 submissions for one winner, but that is an opportunity for those of you who are working on first collections. And there's a lot of information on our website. Max Richtfo Poetry Prize is what that's called. We also are a partner publisher with the National Poetry Series. That works a little differently. The National Poetry Series runs the contest. We run the Max Richtfo Poetry Prize contest ourselves. With the National Poetry Series, they run the contest, and we get to put forward the judge. And then the judge we put forward selects a prize-winning manuscript. And so those are not submissions that come to Milkweed. They go to the National Poetry Series. They too have an adequate website where you could find information on that. We've been a partner publisher with the National Poetry Series for about 10 years now. And that has resulted in some really fabulous books, including Jake Skeet's debut collection of poems. And then we partner also with the University of Colorado at Denver and the literary journal based there called Copper Nickel to publish the Jake Adam York Prize annually. And that's a contest and a prize that's open to first or second books. There are a number of contests, a good number of contests that are for debut collections. So I find it refreshing that they offer that for first or second books. And we've also had some really great books come out of that relationship. It also gives us an opportunity to partner with a university with a terrific, it's kind of a teaching journal, the literary journal is. And so I've gone out several times and met with the students who are making the magazine, and that's always really interesting and fun. So that is kind of a broad introduction to what we do at Milkweed. And then again, I just want to be responsive to your questions. And so I'll be happy to take a look at the chat. And if you have questions, please. I'd also be happy to just take the questions verbatim, if you want to speak up, however you wish.
I'll start us off. I was wondering, Daniel, if you are looking at putting together a manuscript for the first time and looking to send it off, do you want to try and have a percentage of those poems published before you start to send it out to competitions and publishers? And is there a certain percentage that editors look at when they're trying to make those decisions?
It's a good question. It may well be different elsewhere, so I can't make a general conclusion. But here, it's definitely helpful to have some publications. The more prominent the magazines and publications, the better, not surprisingly. But it's not absolutely essential. I would say that the ideal would be, from my perspective, and I'm kind of just really drawing this out of the air, honestly, I have never really thought about a number, but half maybe of the poems would suggest both. It's validating for us as editors to see that other editors of reputable publications have thought the poems were terrific, and so that's validating. Not essential, but validating. And then I think also it's suggestive of a kind of almost literary citizenship, just wanting to get work out there and into the conversation. And which matters.
Thank you. It looks like both Jennifer and Desiree have questions in the chat. It looks like Jennifer asked, what are the advantages for a poet to publish with an independent press?
Well, my experience has been, because of our size, we don't take any books off. We publish every book we take very energetically. And I know from experience in bigger commercial houses that you have your books that are expected to pay the bills. And then you have your kind of mid-list books that are below that. You hope a few of them will break out. And then you have some books that you publish basically as prestige publications, but you're only going to pay so much attention to them because you have to devote your attention to the ones you expect more of a return on. And I think that's a terrible place for a collection of poems to be. I was also on my list at my last place of employ at Harcourt. I was in a position to publish a couple of collections of poems a year. And I could tell you, this is not meant to malign any other publisher, but rather just to say, we pay more attention to every book we publish, and we're more responsive across the board. I think it is helpful to have an independent press that is very well respected. If you're looking at in the world of independent literary presses, it's a really big spectrum. And there are micro presses, there are really small presses, and then you have your bigger independent literary presses that really, for better or worse, we're one of them. And you see our books among the finalists for National Book Awards and major national awards, and also we get a lot of review attention for our books because we've been around a while and have a good reputation. And so on the spectrum, that is perhaps, if those are the kind of things a poet's interested in, that might be preferable than a tiny independent literary press, where I guess if you do the math based on what I was saying about commercial versus indie, the smaller the better is not really the way it works all the way around too. So I feel like we have found a good size where we can publish every book we publish really well, really energetically, very collaboratively with the author, and we can maximize the potential of those books. It doesn't mean we do every time because there's a lot of luck involved. There are a lot of different factors involved in the success or not of a book. And but yeah, hopefully that's helpful, Jennifer.
Yes, thank you so much. Really helpful response. Really good insight.
Thank you. Looking at the next question, Desiree says, thank you for your time, Daniel. My question is this: what do you think makes a good book pitch, either to a publisher or an agent, if you have any insight on that?
I always recommend to writers, show in your approach that you know whom you're approaching. So one of the most common, I guess, shortcomings, for lack of a better word, in a pitch that I get when I read it is the sense that it's exactly the same pitch that went to a whole bunch of publishers. They have no idea who we are. They have no idea whether the book could be a good fit. I like to read pitches that are thoughtful enough to mention other books we've published and why the author thinks what follows the pitch letter could be a good fit on our list. And so I always recommend being selective in your approach and showing in your approach how you're being selective. That makes me pay more attention than it would otherwise. I think it's also helpful to know where the author's coming from, what, if any, of the work has been published, as I was talking about in response to Annie's question. You know, and then briefly, another common mistake from my perspective is going on and on in describing the work. I think that conciseness is better, and then letting the work really speak for itself. And so as long as you can show in the approach that it's well targeted and that there are reasons to take your manuscript seriously, apart from the fact that it's just arrived. And so that would be, you know, where if you do come out of any kind of a writing program alluding to that and whom you worked with, if you have had any of the poems or any of the work in the manuscript published elsewhere, describing that, and then why it's a fit, and then yeah, those are the key things from my perspective.
And I think related to that, with making your pitch stand out, and then the next part kind of goes into Brittany's question, with how to make the manuscript itself stand out, especially when you have as many coming through as you do.
Yeah, that's a really, it's so hard to answer that question generally, even though I appreciate the question, because this sounds silly, but it's almost, there is a kind of moment of recognition that I experience when I'm reading a manuscript that I feel is right for us. And again, really important to remember that fit is paramount. So we're not just trying to pick the best of what we see. We're trying to pick work that aligns with our mission, values, and list. And that said, we're also looking to be surprised, and we're looking for originality. And so one of the things that I get most excited about is reading something that sounds unlike anything I've ever read before. And so that's what I mean by originality. And but how to describe that generally, I find it really challenging. It's I think that for us and for me, the most honest and maybe best way, but it's not simple, I understand, to see what we're doing and if we could be a good fit for your work, if you're thinking of submitting, would be to look at what we're publishing, and to look at a lot of our books. That's really the first thing I say to a lot of writers is how should I try to identify publishers to submit to, and or agents to seek representation. And what I always say is look at the books you care most about and see where they're coming from, and look in the acknowledgments and see if agents are thanked. And then again, that goes back to fit and trying to approach respectfully based on what you perceive to be a fit as a writer. Those are good general strategies.
Thank you. Looking at Malaya's question, could you give us some examples of some of the things you've worked on with poets over the course of the extended editorial relationships?
Yeah. I want to be discreet because not every writer I've worked with likes to have this talked about and be identified. Some are shy about that, or just want the finished work to be what's considered. But I am working. I know he wouldn't mind, because I'm working with a poet right now on a third collection of poems. His name is Sean Hill. And yeah, many of you probably know him from, if not from Bemidji and the Writers Conference he runs up there. You might know his books too. He's published 2 amazing collections of poems. We published the second one called Dangerous Goods. And I'm working with him now on his third book. And the title is the Negroes send their love. And the line is drawn from a piece of correspondence from a historical document that he discovered in an archive. And there's a lot of historical material in the manuscript. There are also, the manuscript, I would say, really broadly and inadequately, is in large part about the Black experience in the Western US. And some of it is personal. So those of you who know Sean will know he's from Georgia, originally from Milledgeville, now lives in Helena, Montana, had also a stop in Fairbanks and in Bemidji. And he's the loveliest man I think one of the most talented poets of his generation. I'm really a huge admirer of his work. And but when he came to me initially with it was a partial manuscript, and I accepted the book on the strength of a partial manuscript. And then he came to me more recently with a much longer manuscript. Maybe he thought when he sent it to me, maybe 75% finished. That was very hybrid. So it included some very intimate, beautiful poems about his experience with fatherhood. So also beautiful poems about his parents and growing up in Milledgeville. But then there's this historical material. There's a play in the collection of poems. And so Sean has had a lot of questions over the course of our dialogue about what stays, what goes, what order, what's, I've worked with enough poets over the years. Some have a really amazing sense, both for how to shape a collection, and then what of their work is the best work. And then I've also worked with a good number of poets who just write poems and then have a massive amount of poems and don't know how to shape it into a collection. But they have, in fact, I had another poet we've published. I'm not going to say his name because I'm not as confident he'd be comfortable with it. But he originally approached me basically with a really thick stack of poems. This is over 10 years ago. And he said, he had published one book at that point, well received, well reviewed. And he said, when I got that massive stack of poems, I think there's a book in here, but I'm having a hard time finding it. And so these are the poems I've written over the last 3 or 4 years. And in that case, I went back to him and said, actually, I think there are 2 books in here. And this is what I think they could look like. And that was the beginning of an editorial collaboration that did result in a 2-book contract and in 2 published books that ended up doing really well. So the one with Sean is still very ongoing. Sean is nothing like that other case I just described in terms of not having a good sense for the shape, but he still has had a lot of questions and thought of the manuscript in a very open way when it arrived. And so those are 2, again, it's so much easier for me to use specific examples to kind of respond to what are general questions. I hope you won't mind.
Oh, that sounds really great. And then going to Melissa's question, she's curious about any challenges that you face with considering hybrid manuscripts if they contain things like a combination of poetry and prose or poetry and art photography. How does that work with Milkweed?
Well, we've published a pretty good number of books like that. And so we don't have any aversion to hybrid work. We've also published, I should say, I think we're kind of known now for publishing prose books by poets. So we published Victoria Chang's first prose book, Dear Memory, a couple years ago. Same with Chris Dombrowski, his first book, Body of Water. There are others, I'm trying to think. And I'd love to do more of it. which makes sense because we publish a lot. Well, we publish a lot of very literary nonfiction books, and so love to work with poets looking to stretch their muscles in those ways, and who have a great story to tell or an argument to make or what have you, and are looking for a publisher that's open to that. In Victoria's case, it was very hybrid with photos, with clippings, with correspondence in her family, and I just like to be really clear from the outset about what the author's vision is for the book, and then how open they are to collaboration along the way, and then we just do it. And we happen to have as our creative director a woman named Mary Austin Speaker, who is herself a poet, who has published 2 terrific collections of poems. And she also is, in my opinion, one of the best book designers in America. And she designs all our covers and all our interiors. And she loves working with poets. And so she's been a very powerful collaborator along the way. And one thing I didn't mention in introducing Milkweed, but it does bear mentioning, is that though we are, I mentioned ebooks and audiobooks, and we have an active digital presence, we're also really committed to beautiful bookmaking. And hopefully, if you've seen our books, you've noticed that. We really believe, one, we love beautiful bookmaking and the artistry of beautiful bookmaking. And 2, we really believe that the readers for the kinds of books we're publishing want beautiful objects. And really, I think that has been borne out by our experience. Sometimes, Dear Memory is a good example of this. We really surprise our distributor and even ourselves with how many copies of a book like that we can sell. Because there is, for really original material that's beautifully written and beautifully made, there is an audience. We don't find it every time, again. So I'm choosing the good examples, but we are committed to beautiful bookmaking. So that was more than the question asked, but hopefully it helps.
Oh, that's really great. And the books really are beautiful. That's part of the process to get to see them, right? Like the physicality of them. I have a question from both Rena and Kinsey. That's the same. And they say that they've been keeping their eye on Milkweed for a few years, but the website consistently says unsolicited manuscripts are not accepted. What would you recommend to poets who want to be on your radar, Daniel?
2 things. I find it really regrettable that we don't have the resources to respond to unsolicited submissions. Typically, we still do get 4,000 or 5,000 submissions a year, and we don't really have the people here to respond to all those thoughtfully. That said, there are 2 ways to get our attention. One, those contests I mentioned are really good idea. They both come with prizes. They both come with cash prizes, which is nice. And also, it's a great way to get attention for a book. And then I respond to all my email, and I'll give it to y'all now. And I do, and I'm approachable. So I'm happy to hear from anyone here. Even though it says we're not accepting unsolicited submissions, we get a lot of them and we look at them. The last time we opened, we had 3,500 within 2 days, and we can't respond. We just aren't. We don't have enough people here, and I can't promise you that we'll respond quickly, but I can promise we'll respond.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for that offer too, and for sharing your email. Yeah. Let's see. And I'm scrolling through the chat. I have a question from Haley. They ask, you mentioned earlier that some of your writers who hadn't had agents previously then went on to sign with agents after you published their work. Can you say more about how that specific situation might change or not change the relationship between a writer and an indie press once an agent becomes part of the picture?
Yeah, that's a complex question. Hi, Haley. Let's see. I've had that turn out a number of different ways. I've also had, before I respond to the question, I've also worked with some writers who I acquired their book from an agent, and then by the time their next book came around, they had severed ties with their agent. So it doesn't always happen that writers are unagented when they arrive and then possibly become agented while we're working with them. Sometimes it happens that they're agented when they arrive and become unagented, either because they want to work exclusively with us as their publisher and representing their rights internationally or what have you. But that's not a response to your question. So it really depends on the individual situation, of course. What can change is that agents have their own ideas, which writers typically want, about the best home for them. Often, in my experience, agents, and again, this is what a lot of writers want, are really interested in advances and in money, and that's how they make a living. And so no problem. I work with a ton of agents, have a ton of respect for them. They fill an important role. I have had situations where we publish a writer, it goes well, they sign on with an agent and move on to another publisher with their next book, either because they want a larger advance than we could afford to pay, or they just think they could do better. And so that's what can happen. I think it can also happen. I've also had the experience where we're publishing a writer, they're unagented, they get with an agent, and we continue acquiring and publishing their work. And we have a great relationship, and the agent adds to the goodness in the relationship. And so that happens too. I always encourage writers who have agents to not forget that their agents work for them. That is, the agent works for the writer. And so I think it is easy, especially for emerging writers, if you do sign on with an agent, and to just trust that the agent is always going to want to do what's best for you. But it is good also, as an artist, as a writer, to have your own opinions and to talk things through and make sure you understand exactly what your agent is telling you and wants to do. Again, I don't mean to offer like a cagey critique of agents, because I don't feel that way. But it can happen that kind of the trust on which a great relationship between publisher and author is based changes, and with the introduction of another player in the relationship. So I guess, to be honest, I think I've experienced everything I just described. And it really comes down to the people, and the send up of the relationship and the work going forward. And so I try to negotiate each one of those situations very individually, and try to bear in mind, I'm always trying to balance in my role the best interests of the writers that we are here to serve and our organization, so that we can be here to serve. for the long haul. And I love having no ulterior motives but those when talking about contracts. And because it makes it so much easier to operate from a position of integrity in that conversation. So that was probably more than you wanted, Haley, in response, but there you have it.
There you go. Thank you. That was really helpful, and just a really good thing to know about milk, like hearing what you said about Milkweed's sense of where their responsibilities are. Thank you. Yeah. I have a question from Jen. For someone looking to become familiar with your press, could you maybe list 3 to 5 books or more that you feel really represent Milkweed's best and brightest?
That's a dangerous question, because it means I would have to exclude some, but I've mentioned a couple. Let's see. Let me offer a few in each category we publish in, or a couple maybe. I'm going to say Braiding Sweetgrass.
Yeah.
It's definitely one of the best books I've ever been involved with. It's really profoundly humbling to publish a book that becomes really a movement book in the way that book has. And yeah, it's really, Annie, because we were together in Homer at the Catchmack Bay Writers Conference in May. And Robin was, Robin was the keynote speaker. And I will never forget really one of the most moving moments in my work in books was that public event at the high school. The capacity there of about 1,000. I think there were 11 or 1,200 there. And when I looked around when Robin finished speaking, 10 or 15 people deep around me in every direction, like 3/4 of the people were weeping. And I was just so, it was really, that was even after we published that book a decade ago, this fall. And that was maybe the first time I really understood the impact. Or in that way. And so that's really, really deeply moving. And also it's just been such a joy to get to know Robin well and work with her. So that's a really great one. And it's also suggestive of that kind of commitment to editorial collaboration I mentioned, and to sustained promotion of a book over a decade now. I'm going to take another book. I alluded to this one that I think is also representative of our list, and representative of our commitment to identifying voices that need to be in American letters, that might not be, were we not willing to invest in a significant collaboration. And he was also at Catchmack Bay. That's Drew Lanham, the author of The Home Place, which is his memoir and the story of growing up on a family farm in South Carolina on land his great-grandparents worked as slaves. And so it's a book about the South and Black history in the South and his family history. It's also a book about his discovery of a love of birds, especially, and of nature on this fraught land. And Drew has also become a really good friend, and I'm really proud of that book, and it's had a really long life. And then those two authors last year were 2 of the 25 recipients of MacArthur Genius Grants in 2022, which is so humbling, so moving. So they're banner books for us. So they're suggestive of, you know, I hate to do it because I love every book we're publishing, but they are, especially on our nonfiction list, they're suggestive of what we're doing. In poetry, the most obvious choice is Ada Limon, currently U.S. Poet Laureate. When I took her, what was at the time, I think her third collection of poems, she was working as an editor at a magazine in New York. She was not Ada Limon, as we know, the public figure now. And so over the last 15 years, to see her work and artistry grow and to see all the impact of her work. I was at the Library of Congress in DC last year when she was inaugurated as Poet Laureate, and that was also a real highlight for me. Wait, was that earlier this year? Whatever. I think it was late last year. And I think also Jake Skeet's collection of poems is a really just broke a lot of ground and is so beautiful and so tender and fierce and original and such beautiful music that we all love it. And the book has done so well. So I would say that. Let's see. How about Diane Wilson's novel, Seed Keeper?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, which we published. Yeah, we published a few years ago, and it has really had a lot of impact and found a great audience. I'd been in touch with Diane since publishing a story in an anthology 16 years ago, and to see that novel develop over those many years, and then be received the way it was so moving. And it's a great novel and representative of the best of our list. I'm not trying to identify Indigenous writers in every category, but actually we have published quite a few Indigenous writers, especially in recent years. And also in fiction, I'll go outside the box and say 2 novels by a writer who is Quebecois American. His name is Denis Ellis Béchard, and the 2 novels are Vandal Love, which won the Commonwealth Prize when it was first published years ago, and then more recently Into the Sun, which is a novel about Messianic Americans in Kabul, Afghanistan. And so it's a great kind of thriller, but also has a lot of valuable critique. And taken together, those books are representative of our values and what we're trying to do here. Could say so many more. I did say more, Jen. Yeah.
You did. That's
Yeah.
good to hear. It's good to hear the esteem that you hold your authors and their work. And I think everybody hopes that they have a publisher that does that, right? So I don't see any more questions in the chat. I want to be cognizant of everybody's time and your time here. And thank you. And if there's any final wisdom that you'd like to impart us with before we say thank you so much and good evening.
No, I don't. I feel I'm too modest to offer wisdom. I don't really think I have much. I don't, honestly, I'm not false modesty. I'm really heartened by your organization. I think that, let me just say, I mentioned that we've published a lot of Indigenous writers in recent years. It's not as if we set out a decade ago and made that a strategic objective. It's really been the beautiful flowering of literary work in that broad community or in those communities that has led us to do that. And I'm sure we'll continue to. So no, I appreciate being asked to join you. I hope it's been helpful in some ways. I hope to hear from you directly in some cases where you'd like to reach out. And thank you